Before we talk about division, let's understand what Bengal was. In the early 20th century, Bengal was a massive province in British India. It was the heart of British power, a center of trade, education, and culture. Think of it as the most important region for the British Empire in India. It was home to millions of people, both Hindus and Muslims, who shared a common language, Bangla, and a rich history. This region was not just land. It was a symbol of Indian intellect and a growing hub for new ideas about freedom and self-rule. The British knew that Bengal's strength was a potential threat to their control over the entire subcontinent. The British Viceroy, Lord Curzon, proposed a plan in 1905. The official reason he gave was that Bengal was too big to be governed efficiently. He argued that splitting it into two smaller provinces would make administration easier and help the government serve the people better. This was the story told to the public, a simple explanation for a very complex decision. On paper, it looked like a practical move, a bureaucratic adjustment to improve governance. However, many people in India suspected there was a hidden motive, something far more calculated behind this administrative reasoning. The British claimed it was for the good of the people, but the people themselves were not so sure. The real reason many believed was a classic British strategy: divide and rule. The British saw that Bengal was becoming a center of Indian nationalism. Leaders from Bengal were inspiring people across India to question British authority. To weaken this growing movement, the British decided to split the province along religious lines. The plan was to create a new province, Eastern Bengal and Assam, with a majority Muslim population, and leave the other part, West Bengal, with a Hindu majority. The goal was to break the unity between Hindus and Muslims, making them see each other as separate groups rather than as one Bengali people. It was a political move designed to secure British power. This strategy was clever and dangerous. By creating a division based on religion, the British hoped to create suspicion and rivalry between the two communities. They wanted to turn the focus away from the fight for independence and towards internal conflicts. If Hindus and Muslims were busy arguing with each other, they would not have the time or the unity to challenge the British Empire. This was the true unspoken goal of the 1905 Partition of Bengal. It was not about making government better. It was about keeping the Indian people divided so that the British could continue to rule over them for many more years to come. The reaction to the partition was immediate and powerful. It was not quiet acceptance. It was a storm of protest that swept across Bengal and the rest of India. People were angry. They saw the partition as an attack on their identity, their language, and their shared history. It was an insult to the spirit of Bengal. Leaders like Rabindranath Tagore, the famous poet, and Surendranath Banerjee, a prominent nationalist, led the charge. They called for a boycott of British goods, a movement known as the Swadeshi movement. People stopped buying things made in British factories and started using Indian-made products instead. This was a direct hit to the British economy. The protests brought Hindus and Muslims together in an incredible show of unity. They tied rakhis, a symbol of brotherhood, on each other's wrists to show that the British could not break their bond. On the day the partition was formally announced, it was observed as a day of mourning. People fasted, marched in silent processions, and sang patriotic songs. The streets of Calcutta, the capital of British India, were filled with cries of Vande Mataram, which means, "I praise thee, mother." This slogan became the anthem of the anti-partition movement. The unity was a direct challenge to the British divide and rule policy, showing that the people of Bengal stood as one. The Swadeshi movement was more than just a protest. It was a movement for self-reliance. People started their own schools, colleges, and businesses. They wanted to build an India that did not depend on the British for anything. This was a new and powerful idea that energized the freedom struggle. The movement was a training ground for future leaders, including many who would later play a key role in India's fight for independence. The British government was shocked by the scale and intensity of the protests. They had expected some opposition, but they had not anticipated such a united and determined resistance from the Indian people. Faced with years of relentless protests and boycotts, the British government finally gave in. In 1911, King George V announced the cancellation of the Partition of Bengal during his visit to India. It was a huge victory for the Indian nationalist movement. It proved that united action could force the powerful British Empire to change its decisions. However, the British made another strategic move. They shifted their capital from Calcutta to Delhi. This was done to move the center of power away from the rebellious heart of Bengal. Though the partition was undone, the seeds of division had been planted, and the idea of separate identities would unfortunately return later. For a few decades, Bengal remained a single province. However, the memory of the 1905 partition and the idea of separate religious identities did not disappear completely. The political landscape of India was changing rapidly. The demand for a separate Muslim nation, Pakistan, led by the All India Muslim League, grew stronger. As Britain prepared to leave India after World War II, the question of the country's future became urgent. The Muslim League argued that Muslims would not be safe in a Hindu-majority India and demanded their own country. This demand set the stage for one of the most painful events in modern history, the Partition of India. In 1947, as India gained its independence, the decision was made to divide the country. The province of Punjab in the west and the province of Bengal in the east were both to be split. The logic was the same as in 1905, but this time it was permanent. The division was again based on religion. Areas with a Muslim majority would go to the newly created nation of Pakistan, while areas with a Hindu majority would remain with India. Bengal was to be cut in two once more. The western part became West Bengal, a state in India. The eastern part became East Pakistan, which would later become the independent nation of Bangladesh in 1971. This second partition was not just a line on a map, it was a human tragedy of immense proportions. Unlike the protests of 1905, this time the division was accompanied by widespread violence and chaos. The announcement of the new borders, drawn by a British lawyer who had never been to India before, sparked riots and massacres. Neighbors turned against neighbors. Hindus and Sikhs living in what would become East Pakistan were forced to flee to India, while many Muslims from West Bengal migrated to East Pakistan. People lost their homes, their land, and everything they had ever known. The journey across the new border was filled with danger and uncertainty. The consequences for the people of Bengal were devastating and long-lasting. Millions were uprooted, becoming refugees in their own ancestral land. Families were torn apart, separated by a border they never wanted. The city of Calcutta was flooded with refugees, creating immense social and economic pressure. The shared culture and economy of Bengal were shattered. The division created a deep wound in the collective memory of the Bengali people, a wound that has not fully healed even today. The dream of a united Bengal was lost forever, replaced by the harsh reality of two separate entities with a shared but painful history. The partitions of 1905 and 1947 have cast a long shadow over the history of India and Bengal. The first partition, though temporary, was a critical turning point. It was the first time the British openly used religious division as a tool of state policy. By introducing this poison into the political system, they created a crack in Hindu-Muslim unity that, despite the initial solidarity, would widen over time. The cancellation of the partition in 1911 was a victory, but it also taught some political groups that agitation could achieve communal goals. This experience indirectly contributed to the more rigid communal politics that emerged in the following decades, leading to the irreversible partition of 1947. The 1947 partition had permanent and far-reaching consequences. It created two Bengals: West Bengal in India and what is now Bangladesh. This division not only changed the geography, but also reshaped the politics, economy, and society of the entire region. West Bengal had to deal with a massive influx of refugees, which put a huge strain on its resources for decades. The port of Calcutta lost its eastern hinterland, which affected its economic prominence. For Bangladesh, the journey was also difficult, first as a part of Pakistan, and then through a bloody liberation war in 1971 to gain its own independence. The border created in 1947 remains a sensitive issue today. The legacy of these divisions is a complex one. On one hand, it is a story of loss and trauma, of a rich, unified culture being violently torn apart. The memories of displacement and violence are passed down through generations. On the other hand, it is also a story of resilience. Both West Bengal and Bangladesh have built their own unique identities while still sharing a common language and cultural heritage. The people on both sides have worked to rebuild their lives and societies from the ashes of partition. The relationship between the two Bengals is a mix of nostalgia for a shared past and the reality of their separate national futures. In the end, the tale of Bengal's partitions serves as a powerful lesson. It shows how political decisions made by distant rulers can have devastating human consequences. The divide and rule strategy used by the British to maintain their empire ultimately led to a legacy of conflict and separation that continues to affect the subcontinent. It reminds us that unity is fragile and that divisions once created can be incredibly difficult to heal. The story of Bengal is a reminder of the price of freedom and the deep scars that history can leave on the soul of a people and a land.